very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on wherever you are joining this live webinar that we are doing. I would like to welcome everybody to CUT's International webinar on Trilateral Approaches to the Indo-Pacific Stability. Now, the Indo-Pacific Stability comes into fore with also coming in with Trump 2.0, and which we are going to see very soon on 20th January. President-elect is going to be president. Moving on, today we have a very rich panel today. I'm going to briefly introduce first our moderator, that is Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, former India's ambassador to Italy, Thailand, Oman, and Poland. He's also a distinguished fellow CUTS International. Now I'd like to introduce our other panel, Admiral Gurjeet Singh, former ambassador to Ethiopia, Germany, Indonesia, ASEAN, and the African Union. He's also our distinguished fellow at CUTS International. Commodore Anil Jai Singh, Honorary Adjunct Fellow at the National Maritime Foundation. Colonel Edison Napio, he's with us from New Delhi. He's Papua New Guinea's Defense Advisor to India. Dr. Tess Newton-Kane, Council Member, Australian Institute of International Affairs. Mr. Joel Abraham, CEO, Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission. And lastly, Ms. Jill Juma, Sub-Regional Trade Advisor at the Pacific Islands Forum. With this, I would just lay out a few house announcements. I'll request all the panelists to keep their cameras on and microphones off if not speaking. We have a short presentation at the start of this webinar. Also, I'll request all the participants who have joined us this morning or afternoon or evening to post their questions in the chat box, which is mentioned down below, so that addressing the speakers and likewise. With this, also, I would like to introduce Indo-Pacific Civil Society Forum, a forum that is founded by CUTS International. It's a coalition of civil society organizations and NGOs working in this area. With further ado, I will request Anjali to take over the reins and then pass it on to our chair and moderator, Ambassador Wadhwa. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to a fruitful discussion.
Okay, so I'll request Daria to kindly present. Meanwhile, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on Trilateral Approaches to Indo-Pacific Stability. Today, we bring distinguished experts to discuss the importance of trilateral cooperation in shaping a stable and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. So now here today, we are looking at a trilateral cooperation specifically among India, Australia, and PIC, Pacific Island countries. In a sense, such a partnership involves the creation of a cooperative framework for the promotion of social and economic development of the developing countries. Here, we deviate from the traditional donor-recipient relationship and replace it with a partnership where the actors involved are considered equal. Last year, towards the end of August, Pacific Islands Forum Head of Government had convened in Tonga for the organization's annual leader meeting. And among the most pressing issues, and also an existential one, was the question of what and who the forum represents. And today, in this webinar, we aim to discuss this expanding membership and the dominance that raises the question of the influence of metropolitan powers and how it can be leveraged for the betterment of Pacific Island countries. We have identified Australia and India, who tend to participate in most multilateral security arrangements across the region. In fact, Australia is by far the largest security assistance donor in the region. Trilateral cooperation, specifically among India, Australia, and the partners in the Pacific Island countries, provide an ideal framework to form a trilateral grouping where each partner brings its unique strength to the table. Next slide here. As a strategic geographic expanse that Indo-Pacific is, it has witnessed an upswing in the cooperation programs. Next slide, please, Dana. Yeah, thank you. And these cooperation programs operate under different modalities, maybe North-South, South-South, and Triangular Development Partnership as well. And the commitment to this kind of engagement is lately building. both bilaterally and through multilateral and plurilaterals as well. And India and Australia have reiterated their respect for such regional organization, foremost being the Pacific Islands Forum, which are committed to continue supporting Pacific Island countries in line with the objectives of 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent endorsed by the PIF leaders. It also recognizes India's role in extending the development partnership to Pacific Island countries through the Forum, India-Pacific Island Cooperation Framework. Also, among others, they are also members of Quad, International Solar Alliance, and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, where both countries are already very active in multilateral platforms that prioritize sustainability and resilience in the region. Not to forget the Australia-India Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative Partnership, which is a testament to our practical cooperation. The previous slide, Taylor, please. And lastly, the Indo-Pacific region. It surely holds a strategic importance for both India and Australia due to its geopolitical and economic significance. It is a critical area for addressing global challenges such as climate change, with its experience offering valuable insight for all of us. And we hope today, through our webinar, we are able to identify ways and means to solidify and improve this trilateral partnership, namely in areas of climate, agriculture, and disaster management. With that, I hand over the floor to Ambassador Anil Badava. Sir is former Indian ambassador to Italy, Thailand, Oman, and Poland. He's also the Distinguished Fellow to CUTS International and is our distinguished moderator for the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anjali, for that introduction, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here in this forum. And I would like to welcome all the participants in particular who spared their time to give their views on the issues that you laid out for us. So I would like to first of all start with India and Australia, which you pointed out in your opening introduction. Both these countries have been gradually inking agreements to deepen their partnerships in various sectoral areas. And recently, we've seen MOUs being signed to expand their cooperation in space and defense industries. And of course, a defense interoperability agreement already exists between them. Both are part of Resilient Supply Chains Initiative along with Japan. And as partners in the Quad, they have an alignment on the threat perception in the region, which has actually undergone a sea change due to the aggressive rise of China and its coercive actions in the South and East China Seas. Also, the forays into the West Pacific and South Asia, the aggression on the India-China land border, and some coercive trade-related measures which have been taken against Australia in the recent past. So a geopolitical contestation, which we see is underway between China and the United States, also in the Indo-Pacific. And Australia, United States, Japan, and New Zealand, and to an extent, India and France have been the dominant players in the past in the Western Pacific. But China's desire to breaking out of the island chains, its quest for resources, and also for dominance in the security field has created vulnerabilities. So in this background, as major donors and partners of the Pacific Island states, Australia and India have come together to forge a common vision of cooperation. And this comes at a crucial juncture, I feel, in this geographical expanse, where the small island developing states particularly are progressively being vocal about their challenges, about their contestations, and the outlook. Now, the existential threat of climate change and environmental degradation has become an absolute reality for the small island developing states in the region. And there are enormous amounts of related problems which come with that, such as natural disasters, the sea level rise, loss of biodiversity, democracy deficit, governance challenges, etc. Financing for sustainable development goals is undoubtedly under threat, given the background of the world economic situation today, the wars and conflicts, food insecurities, and weakening of the global supply chains. In recent times, India has also stepped up its development cooperation with the Global South and now provides crucial resources such as skills training, capacity building, and knowledge sharing based on its development experiences, besides financing. Recent initiatives by India, like what you mentioned, the Forum for Indo-Pacific Islands Cooperation, FIPIC, has been creating an impact on the regional geopolitics of the island countries. And this cooperation between India and the Pacific Island states has covered areas like climate-resistant agriculture and fisheries, disaster management and resilience, which you talked about, but also renewable energy and affordable technologies, maritime domain awareness in port repairs, the skills development in appropriate areas and resources, financing for small and medium enterprises, health and telemedicine, and skilling and education, to name a few areas. So I think India and Australia should pool their financial resources and work together in areas like climate change mitigation, disaster resilience, capacity building, protection of biodiversity and ecosystems. And the partnership should also facilitate enhanced Indo-Pacific regional cooperation in disaster management. The Indian-led Indian Ocean Regional Information Fusion Center, where Australia has a liaison office, can play an enhanced role in disaster management. And I think India and Australia could work together to create some expertise in forecasting, oil spill modeling, and systems for management, treatment, and mitigation, which could help the small island states in the region. Then we have the question of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, the IUU fishing, as we call it, which contributes to food insecurity and increases the vulnerability of coastal communities. It is a key security threat for many small island states and undermines maritime governance through the interconnections between IUU fishing and other illegal activities. And that, what readily comes to mind is human trafficking, forced labor, piracy, and illegal trade. Chinese trawlers are active in the region, plundering the marine resources. India and Australia can use the fusion centers in India and Singapore to help identify trends, challenges, gaps, and new developments in IUU fishing. Again, in this region, submarine cables form the backbone of modern communication infrastructure, carrying over 95% of international data, including telephone and data communications traffic, and providing sources of power for many countries. And these cables are vulnerable to a variety of threats which pose security and economic consequences. If you recall, Tonga was disconnected for several weeks in 2019 and 2022. Australia has been at the forefront of efforts to create regulatory frameworks for the protection of undersea cables and for cybersecurity of critical infrastructure. India's strategic location and proximity to key transatlantic cables and its workforce makes it an attractive regional hub for cable laying and repairs. So I think both countries can assist island states through public-private partnerships that provide affordable financing and assistance to design, to build, and operate new cables. They can sponsor capacity building workshops also with the officials of the vulnerable states. But I won't talk too much on this because we have experts which are going to talk about various aspects. So with this background, let us start our discussions. And we all have about 7 minutes in which you can put your views through, after which we leave some time for question and answers. And I would like to call upon first Mr. Joel Abraham, who's the former CEO of Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission. I believe he's going to talk about climate resilient agriculture and fisheries in particular. So you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa, and very insightful comments. And I take this opportunity to thank the CUTS team for recognizing and organizing this webinar. I think this is, for me personally, this is a great opportunity for me to contribute in the critical conversations especially conversations around climate resilience in the Pacific. I mean, we generally talk about climate change in Fiji. We faced the most devastating impacts of climate change. In fact, in 2016, TC Winston that hit Fiji is the largest cyclone ever to make landfall in the southern hemisphere. It was a Category 5 cyclone, and it basically wiped everything in its pathway, and it took away a third of Fiji's GDP. And as I was reading the conference notes, I could not help look at the problem statement written there, where the uh, fiscal deficits are stated, and the debt to GDP ratios for Pacific Island countries is also being looked at, and that leaves a very small fiscal space for smaller countries which suffer the most, but receive the least. And for me personally, I'm somebody that's deeply committed to fostering sustainable solution, to strengthening regional frameworks. I believe that the Pacific's unique position presents not only our challenges, but also opportunities to demonstrate leadership and innovation in addressing climate impacts. And the reason I say this is because Pacific Island countries are rather small in nature. I mean, geographical size, population-wise, Fiji's got a population of less than 1 million. It is easier to understand, to review and apply, develop, monitor, measure, and correct uh, programs or interventions that can go a long way in addressing the challenges of adverse climatic condition. Now, our region, the entire Pacific Island region, generally is labeled as a small island state. We're trying to change that language to big ocean state. So instead of saying we are divided by oceans, we've been taking on the mantle of saying that we're united by oceans. And our region, as you all know, stands at the forefront of climate change. It's not only the rising sea level that threatens our shorelines, but it also threatens our agricultural land and freshwater sources. So the problem is multiplied and magnified. There's issues of ocean edification as well, and that basically jeopardizes the vibrant coral reefs that we have, and the importance of coral reef towards our biodiversity as well as our food security is quite high. Most communal villages rely on the sea as a major food source. We are battered with extreme weather conditions such as cyclones. Just recently in December, we were battered by floods. Look at countries like Vanuatu that have just been hit with a major earthquake, 7.2, if I'm correct. And this not only disrupts our lives and our livelihoods, but it also badly damages our infrastructure. And for a country that does not have uh, enough resources or enough competition in the market to be able to drive the prices down to develop such infrastructure. We are so geographically remote that we have to import raw materials. We don't only get hit by the cost of increasing commodity price, but the cost of increasing freight prices. And issues of geopolitics just exacerbate the already existing issues that we face. So, these challenges are needed to be highlighted at regional and as well as at international level. And I believe that collaborative action is what is required. Now, solutions cannot be imposed externally. And I believe that there must be respect for the nuances of our local context. And we must work to empower local Pacific communities to take the lead. And this is where partnerships can become very transformative. In the Pacific, we are fortunate to have partners like India and partners like Australia who bring in their complementary expertise. Now, if I'm to look at two examples, let's look at sustainable agriculture and India's advancement in drought-resistant crops. This includes millets and hybrid varieties, and it is these breakthroughs and technologies, or improvements in technologies rather, that offer a lifeline to our farmers that deal with increasingly unpredictable rainfall. You've got a large sugarcane sector, and in most instances, you'll find that uh, crushing season is bad this year just because we did not predict the rain. The rain came at the wrong time. We could not harvest at the right time. Floods have devastated a lot of crops. So there's quite a lot of issues that we generally face, specifically in terms of the unpredictability of rainfall. And this is not only, this not only affects Fiji in terms of the ability to produce and participate in economic activities, but it also threatens our food security. If we look at Australia's example of integrating water management systems and technologies, so things like drip irrigation, water trading markets, and looking at enhancing efficiency in storage solutions, these basically serve as a model, and market access between Pacific Island countries and Australia is easier and faster. And freight costs are also considerably lower when compared to other Asian countries. Now, these provide a model for us to address growing water scarcity. And specifically, when you're in a Pacific Island country, you're surrounded by uh, millions and billions of liters of water, but it's seawater. It's the use for it in commercial agriculture, the use for it for everyday use is just not there. We do explore with technologies of desalination plants in trying to get our water sources back, but we do face issues with debris and dirt, especially in catchment areas. We are now working with utilities in as part of our regulatory system to try and see how we can incentivize landowners or customary landowners to be able to participate in activities of maintaining and cleaning catchment areas. So I think those are very great examples that we could use and utilize. Quickly looking at fisheries, we do have marine preservation areas. We do have a lot of reliance on fisheries, especially in terms of our cultural identity. We do believe a lot in adopting sustainable fishing practices, and we are informed by Australia's expertise in this, especially in terms of monitoring and in terms of marine management. And these examples serve as a good testament and as well as a good example of how we can look at long-term viability of resources. So I believe that these collaborative efforts can extend beyond technologies. They can also include practices and cultural practices, and they can be cross-learning under various South-South cooperation. And there can be various capacity building initiatives to ensure that Pacific stakeholders are able to adopt. They're also able to adapt. They're also able to sustain solutions and do them independently, and they can become in charge of their own systems. Uh, in terms of looking at partnerships, apart from the FCCC, the other venture that I'm working on is a regional center for the Asia Pacific region, specifically focused on building capacity for Pacific regulators. And we believe that in order to build resilience from within, we need to have knowledge centralizations to have a regional platform that is able to capture the best practices, the lessons learned, technical innovations, and how we can basically learn from each other to continue to mitigate risks that continuously arise from adverse climatic conditions. We are also hit by issues of labor mobility. Fiji's lost quite a lot of people, a significant amount of people moving to greener pastures in Australia and New Zealand. And labor mobility is the reality of a globalized world. And as such, we need to continuously invest in education as well as upskilling of our public and private sector. So capacity building becomes quite important. Training programs must be tailored to specific context, ensuring that local stakeholders are equipped with very critical skills to be able to implement and sustain solutions. And I believe that by embedding these programs into regional institutions, we can create a legacy that's not only self-reliant, but is also innovative. Now, the idea is to be able to create a regional pool or panel of experts that are both regional, local, but also guided by international best practices and policies. And that will reduce our dependency on sometimes copy-paste solutions is what I would refer to. And we have consultants coming in providing advisory into the Pacific, and we are unable to relate to some of those advice because they've not been localized or contextualized in cultural context. So we must ensure that that relevance is not lost and that the Pacific is able to reinforce its ownership in dealing with development issues and challenges. As such, I believe that these priorities would align to the initiatives of creating very collaborative frameworks. The idea is to bring together diverse perspectives to address specific challenges, which we believe are unique, but also one that is shared globally. We believe that institutions must be designed to support regional cooperation, regulatory excellence, as well as technical capacity building initiative needs to take place. And I believe that advanced jurisdictions like India as well as Australia play a very pivotal role. I can give examples of quick cooperation that we've signed on with two entities based out of India. One is Florence Global, and the idea is to establish a Pacific School of Regulation. So we'll be for the first time bringing in a specialized training for regulators in the Pacific in efforts to build their regulatory capabilities so that they become catalyst and they're able to drive policy changes faster and ensure implementation is done. And that implementation is not only robust, but it also addresses the challenges that people face at the grassroots level. And I think by housing such efforts within dedicated knowledge hubs, the Pacific can leverage its strength, integrate global best practices, and basically set benchmarks in sustainable development. And that can be also a learning ground for larger jurisdictions like Australia and India. So we could be looking at trialing out very innovative solutions in the Pacific. So thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa. That's my contribution, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Abraham, for those thoughts, and especially I like your thoughts about involving the local communities and capacity building for regulators, along with technical capabilities through collaboration. Very important points that you made. Thank you so much. I now move on to Colonel Edison Napio, who is the defense advisor of Papua New Guinea in India. And I believe he's going to concentrate on disaster management and resilience. You have the floor, sir.
Ambassador, thank you so much for inviting me. Unfortunately, I'm not able to come on video live. All there?
No problem. We can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So there's a bit of a technical problem with my video. So I will come as it is now. But thank you for your the privilege that you have offered me to come on this forum to share my thoughts. So by way of introduction, the Pacific, as you all know, is prone to all types of natural disasters, including earthquakes, volcanoes, king tides, landslides, flooding, tsunami, to name a few. And some of these natural disasters are due to climate change that is happening. However, the current response arrangements in place in those small island nations to appropriately manage disasters in the Pacific varies from country to country due to lack of essential resources to restore normalcy in the affected communities and villages in the aftermath. Therefore, the question would be, how can these small island nations would manage disasters and resilience or be resilient in future? So I suppose this reminds my point of discussion in this forum. And these are entirely my personal views and opinion, and I'm not representing any particular organization in this regard. But before I discuss further, I would like to just summarize as a basis of my discussion on disaster management and resilience. So disaster management, as we all know, refers to the process of planning, organizing, coordinating, and implementing measures to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. Disasters can be natural, as mentioned, or man-made, such as industrial accidents, chemical spills, or terrorism. On the other hand, resilience in disaster management refers to the capacity of individuals, communities, systems, organizations to observe and adapt to shocks or stresses caused by disasters while continuing to function effectively. So in summary, disaster management is about systematically handling all aspects of disasters, while resilience focuses on the strength and ability of people and systems to withstand, adapt to, and recover from those events. So now I'd like to discuss about how India and Australia could partner with these small Pacific Island countries to collaborate with a well-coordinated effort. And I have identified 6 areas that can be worked on. But foremost, Australia and India, given their geographical proximity, technological advancements and experience in disaster management have significant potential to assist Pacific Island countries in developing robust early warning systems, climate prediction modules, and disaster response training programs. This collaboration significantly enhance local capacity and reduce dependence on external aid over time. Here's an outline of how both countries can contribute in the following critical areas identified. First area would be developing early warning systems, collaboration opportunities. Joint projects between India, Australia, and the Pacific nations can lead to region-specific early warning systems, making use of modern communication platforms like mobile apps and community radio systems to ensure warnings reach remote populations effectively. Area 2, cyclone prediction modules, collaboration opportunities. India and Australia can work together to provide joint training programs, workshops, and capacity building initiatives, equipping local meteorologists with the skills to improve the accuracy and reliability of cyclone predictions in the Pacific Islands. Area 3, disaster response training programs, collaboration opportunities. Australia and India can jointly offer training workshops on disaster preparedness, response strategies, and resource management. These programs could focus on local community leaders, disaster management teams, and volunteers, ensuring that local populations have the knowledge and skills to act quickly and effectively when disasters strike. And the fourth area would be technology transfer and capacity building, and the collaboration opportunities. By facilitating technology transfer, India and Australia can help Pacific Island countries build more resilient infrastructure, better disaster management, data management systems, and more efficient communication networks for disaster response. Fifth area we can look at is sustainable disaster risk management, collaboration opportunities. Both countries can collaborate with the Pacific Islands in creating long-term disaster risk management strategies, ensuring that disaster preparedness and risk reduction become part of the region's development agenda, reducing the need for external aid. And the last but not the least is empowering local communities. Both India and Australia emphasize community-driven disaster management through joint training programs, workshops, and awareness campaigns. They can empower Pacific Island communities with the tools and knowledge necessary to respond independently to disasters. This includes developing local disaster management plans, educating communities on first aid and search and rescue techniques, and creating local disaster response teams. And in conclusion, by combining India's expertise in technological solutions, early warning systems, and disaster management with Australia's advanced forecasting capabilities and response experience, both countries can significantly enhance the disaster resilience of the Pacific Island countries. Through technology transfer, training, and collaborative disaster management frameworks, the region can reduce its dependence on external aid and better prepare for the increasing threats posed by climate change and natural disasters. This will foster self-reliance, improve the resilience of vulnerable communities, and contribute to sustainable development in the Pacific. So, Ambassador, that pretty much concludes my brief, but in a nutshell, my thoughts and views on the national disaster management and resilience in the Pacific.
Well, thank you very much, Colonel Napio. I think that was extremely concise, and you elaborated on those 6 areas of collaboration, which are exactly what is needed: early warning systems and prediction modules, the disaster response management, technology transfer, capacity building, risk management strategies, and also empowering the local communities. And thank you for finishing on time. Many thanks for your views. I would now like to move on to Ambassador Gurjit Singh, former Ambassador and Distinguished Fellow of CUTS International. I believe he's going to focus on challenges and geopolitical sensitivities. You have the floor, Gurjit.
Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa. Thank you, CUTS, for inviting me. And I think a very topical subject. I quite enjoyed Ambassador Wadhwa's opening remarks, who gave a very important picture of the region. And I also heard both the previous speakers from the region very carefully because they provided us the local flavor. So one of the things about trilateral cooperation is that while there could be a donor, there could be a South partner, but the most important is the recipient partner. And that recipient partner voice must be heard. I think when Prime Minister Modi spoke at the FIPIC conference last time in 2023, I think he clearly said, we are listening to you. And in his closing remarks on that day, he responded to most of the suggestions made and announced various things showing that we were ready to respond. So I think in a trilateral cooperation, unlike a donor-donee partnership, it is a North-South, South-South partnership. And in the case of the South Pacific, the recipient partner is largely a LDC. So there are special considerations. Besides LDC, they are all small island development states. I heard him call it large ocean, but whatever. I mean, the point is that there is a special set of circumstances. What we do in Africa, for instance, on trilateral cooperation, is not easily replicated in the South Pacific. So there are many things which are different. One difference is that in the South Pacific, China is a strategic challenge. In Africa, it's really not a strategic challenge. It's an economic challenge. Secondly, Australia doesn't have much of a role in Africa. But Australia is the lead development partner in the Southern Pacific. And therefore, we should also be listening to Australia and its development priorities, because once you hear them and you hear the island countries, then you already have a matrix of what you need to do. This will bring you the framework within which, so today, if we heard two of our colleagues from the region, I think we have, and I'm looking forward to hearing the Australian colleague, because I think that will give you the picture. Now, in this, Indian priorities also come into play. Now, Indian priorities are largely determined by its capabilities. I don't think India is seriously looking to strategically challenge China in the South Pacific. I mean, it's a nice thing to say, but I don't think practically that is something that's going to happen. What India can challenge China is the way we do it in Africa, where we give you a model of cooperation which is more easily acceptable than the Chinese. So I think that is where India comes into play. Secondly, India tends to respond to local priorities. Now, in this local priorities, I would also include Australian priorities, because we would like to work with Australia in the South Pacific. What is the benefit of Australia strategically to work with India? One, more and more India and Australia have a common view of the Indo-Pacific. That is now a strategic reality. So therefore, it makes it easier for a common strategic view, a common set of values which we bring, and that is the challenge to China. What India can bring is a delivery of development at a lower cost and more effective than perhaps hitherto attempted. That is the advantage we have in Africa, and that is why countries of the G7 come to India to work with it in Africa. Only for this reason, our model is better accepted, our costs and effectiveness are better. So I think that is where India comes. Now, I heard many ideas being expressed on what we can do. One other thing India can certainly provide is through the ITEC program is the capacity building. And I think the ITEC program, since the COVID pandemic, has adapted itself very well. It uses technology for e-ITEC, meaning you don't have to travel all the way to India. You can actually do programs on site with the help of not only Indian trainers, but let us say, for example, Australian trainers. And the cost of that comes down. So I think Indian established capabilities in public health, in small and medium enterprises, in capacity building can all come into play. Essentially, when you look at the geopolitical struggle in the world today, what we come across is that I don't think, from the Indian point of view, we are looking at traditional battles in the South Pacific. We are looking at the non-traditional battles, and that includes climate change. Now, here is where I have a difference of nuance. In the Australian view of development, and Australia contributes about $12 billion to the Southern Pacific, almost $1 to $2 billion a year. Gender and climate change are their major priority. Whereas from the Indian point of view, I think all the SDGs together should be our priority, not only climate change and gender, which are only some among the SDGs. So I think if I heard our colleagues from the region right, there is a desire to have the full modicum, full spectrum of SDGs implemented. Second point I want to make is that how do you finance this? Now, largely what Australia is doing is the grant model. Largely what India has followed is the grant model. We have lines of credit only to two countries, Fiji and Papua New Guinea, and that too are at least 5 to 10 years old. They are not borrowing anymore. So what is the financing model which will, lead to self-financing of projects? How do you get there? And if you implement the SDGs, then perhaps you can bring the development finance institutions of various partner countries, including India, Australia, France, to see how can we put in money. One of the things we are doing in Africa is pursuing impact investing. Impact investing is where you fund companies which will achieve the SDGs. You don't go the grant route. You go the business route, but achieve the same thing. So I think that is one possibility of encouraging companies from Australia and India funds to support local companies which will achieve SDGs in their thing. In Africa, this is doing well. I think we could do it in the Southern Pacific. With that, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gurjeet. I think those are very important points. Most importantly, you stressed the fact that the interests of the recipient partner are most important. You also laid out how India works in development cooperation, especially in Africa. And then again, you said that India should take into account what Australia needs from this cooperation as well. The model that India has of lower costs and most effective model, which has been applied in Africa, could be also adapted in this region. The ITEC program of capacity building, which you laid out, and also how it helps the small and medium enterprises in the health sector, etc. And finally, the self-financing model, which you laid out for our participants and for the audience. So thank you very much. Very pointed and important recommendation. I now move on to our next speaker, which is Dr. Tess Newton-Kane from Australian Institute of International Affairs. I believe you're going to concentrate on the strategic development aspects.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you for the invitation to join you this evening. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional and Indigenous owners of the lands from which I'm joining you here in Brisbane, the Turrbal and Jagera peoples. So it's, I think this is a really important conversation in among many conversations that are going on in the region at the moment. As well as being part of the Australia Institute of International Affairs, I'm also an adjunct associate professor at the Griffith Asia Institute. And I have been focusing on policy, politics, and development in the Pacific Islands region for more than 25 years. 20 of those years I spent living in Vanuatu, and I'm also a citizen of that country. So these issues are ones that are close to both my head and my heart. In terms of the strategic development and the strategic environment that's at play in the Pacific, I think what I might do is just touch on a few issues that I think highlight how this strategic moment, how this strategic landscape is seen from a Pacific perspective, rather than from the perspective of these bigger powers that we've been talking about, including India, Australia, China, and others. Obviously, the strategic community in the Pacific is very well aware of the moment in which we find ourselves, and is very well aware of what's going on and what the drivers are of different engagements and different conversations in which they're asked to participate. They're very well aware that there is an increased focus on the region, both bilaterally and multilaterally, from not just the what are sometimes termed the traditional partners, Australia, New Zealand, the US to some extent, but also a return from some partners, including the UK and some of the other European countries, and also increased interest from newer partners, including India. China has an established set of relationships in the region. It's celebrating 50 years of diplomatic relations with Fiji this year. It was one of the first countries that Vanuatu formed diplomatic relationships with. So the Chinese presence is not new. The nature of that presence has changed in the last 10 or so years. It's become more visible. It's become more variegated in terms of how it manifests, and it's become bigger in terms of diplomatic presence, military engagement, and spending, including via investments and aid support to various countries. And we've also seen an increased ramping up of the China-Taiwan competition for diplomatic allegiance, and that as part of that, we've seen relatively recent shifts by Solomon Islands, Kiribati, and most recently Nauru. So these are all issues that are very much at play in terms of how the strategic thinkers of the region are contemplating these things and reacting to them and seeking to work with them. And obviously, as we know, the Pacific Islands region is not a homogenous region. So there's a huge amount of diversity in terms of politics, economics, culture, customary practice, all linguistic diversity. All of this is at play. So it's hard to, and not always very useful or meaningful to make big generalizations about the region because of that diversity. However, we can pull out a couple of what seem to be quite common threads. And I guess the most significant one is that, if you look at what we hear from Pacific leaders, whether it's through the forum or elsewhere, they're making it very clear that they don't want to be pulled into someone else's geostrategic game. So the Pacific Island countries are not a chessboard on which other people move pieces, and neither are they a prize to be fought for. This is not 1942 anymore. The countries that were the subject to theaters of war and decision-making about strategic movements in 1942 are now independent sovereign nations in their own right. And they have foreign policies, they have strategic positions, they have very clear statements as to what they want when it comes to security and development in their countries and in their region. And I think that this needs to be stated and restated. I think that we've seen and will see more lip service to this idea of listening to partners. But I think that we really need to be quite clear that the time for saying we're going to listen to partners is past, and that the needs and the concerns of Pacific Island leaders and Pacific Island communities are such that their patience with not being heard, not being included in the right conversations, not having their concerns sufficiently prioritized, their patience with all of that is wearing very thin. There is a degree of healthy skepticism across the region about this increased interest from partners such as India, the UK, the US, France, whoever else, that this is not about, this is about trying to contain or counter China, despite the fact that the Pacific Islanders are being told all the time, no, we really are your friends. This is a long-term relationship. This is a real partnership. It's going to take a long time for that message to land and to stick. At the moment, it's being heard and it's being noted, but it's not embedded. It's not being really believed at a very deep basis. My time is almost up. I want to say one thing about climate change and how this intersects with the desire for outside partners to have geostrategic influence. Pacific Island countries have led from the front and in terms of global climate change negotiations. They were key to establishing the Paris Agreement, and they've been key in various other ways as well. What they haven't done yet, and what they may well do soon, is seek to play this need for strategic influence to their own advantage when it comes to addressing climate change. We're all well aware that the focus on the climate crisis has dropped over the last few years. It's been supplanted by geostrategic concern. The Pacific Islands region have an opportunity to target the problem at its heart by dealing directly with those members of the G20 who wish to have increased influence in their region, and basically using that as a way to nudge better behavior. And that includes cutting emissions, leaving fossil fuels in the ground, and providing adequate and accessible financing for both mitigation, adaptation, and thirdly, loss and damage. And with that, I will close there and look forward to further conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kane, for your views. I think very important in terms of how the nature of Chinese presence in the area has changed, and also the important point that you brought out about the focus on climate change being supplemented by geopolitical considerations, and how the Pacific Island states are now looking at the G20 nations as partners in this endeavor. And of course, the cooperative relationship that will take some time, you pointed out, to be built in the future. Thank you so much for your views. I'd now quickly like to move on to Commodore Anil Jay Singh. I believe he's going to focus on maritime cooperation and economic connectivity. You have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Wada and CUTS International, for giving me this opportunity to be amongst this very eminent panel to discuss, the trilateral cooperation between India, Australia, and the Pacific Island states. I think the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent really defines is actually the blueprint, I think, for the sustainable and peaceful development of the Pacific Island states. Amongst the 10 commitments across 7 interconnected themes thematic areas that this document includes, those that are related to the maritime domain would include peace and security, ocean and environment, climate change, and disasters and connectivity. So from a maritime perspective, which I will be covering in the next few minutes, there are three features that define an island state. Firstly, its destiny and the well-being of its people is inextricably linked to the oceans. Secondly, its maritime connectivity with the world is critical for its economic sustenance. And thirdly, its maritime boundaries are disproportionately large, of any of the small island states if you take into account, is disproportionately larger than its capacity to either secure them or exploit them optimally. This makes them very vulnerable to external exploitation. So in the next few minutes that I have, I will highlight three very fundamental points regarding India's maritime engagement with these states, and how can India and Australia leverage their convergences to support these island states in the maritime domain. So firstly, maritime security. As I mentioned, the Pacific Island countries have a capacity deficiency in securing their maritime boundaries. Their strategic location has led to China making major inroads into this region and various economic and diplomatic overtures to them. Therefore, if like-minded nations and like Australia and India are not able to address their concerns through various capacity building initiatives, they will be susceptible to Chinese inducements of infrastructure and maritime development. This is something I think both India and Australia and like-minded countries have to guard against. Almost every activity in the maritime domain is underpinned now by a security dimension, be it economic, geopolitical, or related to the effects of climate change. India's engagement with the region, with the entire Indo-Pacific region, particularly in the maritime domain, is underscored by its Sagar policy, which, as we know, is an acronym for security and growth for all in the region. This also includes the Western Pacific, as had been very clearly articulated by our Prime Minister during his keynote address at the Shangri-La Dialogue in June 2018. The geographical distance between India and the South Pacific states may limit India's current maritime capacity building efforts, but with Australia, it could strengthen regional maritime domain awareness through effective information sharing mechanisms. Ambassador Wadhwa had referred to the IFC IOR, the Singapore IFC, etc., where we can have a very, very active and robust network for maritime information sharing. Interoperability amongst platforms. We operate the P8I long-range maritime patrol aircraft. Australia operates the P8. There's a lot of equipment interoperability. Both these countries are regularly exercising with each other as part of larger multilateral exercises and bilateral exercises to improve interoperability. So whether it's the P8I or it's the Guardian drone or it's the Sikorsky helicopter, which India is now getting, and also the deployment of ships. All of these can contribute very effectively towards maritime domain awareness, which is essential for a geographical area as large as the Pacific Island countries to have this information with them, and also to prevent any untoward activity from developing into a situation where it is irretrievable. Both these countries can supplement the current EEZ surveillance and the search and rescue organization by local capacity building. For example, as we've done in the Maldives, as we've done in Mauritius, we've given them Donny aircraft. We provided them manpower to train their people. It's inclusive capacity building. We are not imposing ourselves on them. We are providing them the capacity to be able to surveil their own waters and carry out their own search and rescue activities. Similar things could be done in the Pacific Island countries as well. Deployment of Indian naval ships. The Indian Navy has this multi-mission deployment where 12 to 15 Indian naval ships are deployed across the length and breadth of the Indo-Pacific at any given time, which have a twofold purpose. Firstly, of course, is their primary role of being on deployment for maritime domain awareness, and as has been proved over time and embellished India's credentials as a preferred security partner and a first responder, the Indian Navy's ability to respond to any crisis in this region to be the first to respond to any crisis in the region. I think that is a very important consideration we must keep, because with climate change, which is something that is irreversible now, the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events is only going to increase in the years to come. Perhaps if a situation develops where there's a serious threat from any adversary in the region to the Pacific Island countries, India and Australia together, with their with the strength of their bilateral relationship and their foundational agreements that they have amongst themselves now, could even probably mount coordinated patrols to carry out SAR EEZ surveillance and provide other sort of military assistance as and when required. Other areas of cooperation, of course, is to address the non-traditional security threats, security of undersea cables, etc., which has already been alluded to earlier. The second element is of maritime connectivity. This has two dimensions. Firstly is the connectivity amongst the island states, within their waters. And secondly is the ability to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific and the safety and security of trade to and from these island states to the rest of the world. Both Australia and India are firmly committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific and ensuring a rules-based order at sea. India, through various institutional arrangements, some of which have been highlighted today, can definitely benefit from mutual and beneficial and mutual and legitimate, let me put it that way, exploitation of the tremendous amount of maritime resources that are available in the Pacific Island states. As India grows as an economy, as India grows towards it as a developed economy, it will require to expand its footprint. And India, by its very nature, has rarely ever, if ever, tried to do it through unfair means or through coercion, and has always tried to create an inclusive mechanism so that both sides can mutually benefit from that. So I think maritime connectivity and India's ability to operate over there and exploit those waters for mutual benefit of both India and the Pacific Island states is very important. And the third aspect that I want to highlight is shipbuilding. This has been specifically mentioned in the CUTS concept paper. India is trying very hard to revitalize its shipping industry. Which has languished for the last few years. And just to give an example, while China has 55% market share of the global shipbuilding industry, India's share is only 0.5%. Now, India does not have the capacity or the shipyards to compete with China, Japan, and Korea in building 100,000-ton super carriers and VLCCs, etc. But what India must focus on, and this has been discussed in various other fora, is to try and get into a niche category. For example, let's say 10,000 to 20,000 ton ships, merchant ships with green technologies, modern construction, modern sort of equipment, and use these, try and make ourselves a leader in this area. Now, this is both beneficial for India from its coastal shipping perspective, from its transshipment perspective, and would be a boon to smaller countries, particularly for their inter-island connectivity and their connectivity with countries in their vicinity. So I think India should focus on that and build up its shipbuilding ecosystem and thereafter be able to export to the world. That would be a very important area where India would gain a lot of maritime leverage. The other concern, of course, is climate change.
Wrap up, please.
Half a minute, sir. Just half a minute.
Thank you.
The other concern, of course, is climate change. As I mentioned, but this has already been covered, so we can support various capacity building initiatives for climate resilience in the maritime domain, disaster risk reduction, etc. And one last point, as a leader of the global south, I think India can do a lot towards projecting the concerns of these countries, particularly as far as the SDGs are concerned, as Ambassador Gurjeet Singh mentioned, and climate change concerns. It's a win-win for both. India is an influential voice in major international fora where it can project the concerns of these countries, and India gains by getting their support for crucial decisions that India wants taken in its favor. After all, each country carries a vote in the UN, which makes it a very very sort of, not a very powerful lobby, but a lobby nevertheless. So with that, I will close now, and I will look forward to an interactive session to answer any more queries that may be there on the maritime aspects of
Thank
this
you, Commander.
relationship.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you for laying out how the importance, first of all, of maritime connectivity for the Pacific Island states, the Indian policies of Sagar, and also the requirement to have interoperability between India and Australia. And then finally, how India should have the capacity as the first responder in the region, cooperation in the maritime resources with the Pacific Island states. And then you talked very importantly about the niche areas in which India should concentrate on as far as the shipping industry is concerned, smaller vessels, green vessels with much more technology projection, and also, projecting the concerns of the Pacific Island states in various fora. Thank you so much. Quickly move on now to Dr. Jill Juma. So she is going to talk about, I believe, renewable energy and sustainability, and she is a sub-regional trade advisor for Melanesia in the Pacific Islands Forum. So very relevant for all of us to listen to you. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador, and I hope I'm audible.
Yes,
if
you
I'm
are.
not.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Good evening from Canberra, and before I proceed, I would like to extend my apologies for joining in slightly late. It was just a slight connectivity issue. But thank you once again for this opportunity to Kat and to the rest of the esteemed panelists. But just to highlight a few things, first I would like to put a caveat that the views here are not in any way linked to my organization, but of course it's based on the experience and exposure gained working in the Pacific region, previously working in Africa, and also working in Asia, India, some time back in another life. Just to talk about the model, I heard Ambassador Gurjit mention a model that can be emulated in the Pacific region, looking into what is happening in Africa. Perhaps just to enlighten the panel that we already have an ACP model through the Samoa Agreement. And that is a very critical model in as much as it is geared in looking at the EU relations with Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific. I think some of the issues there would be reflective of the key interests in the Pacific region that would trigger further or deeper relations between India, Australia, and of course the Pacific. What I would like to keenly highlight based on my observations and experience, and of course exposure, is I think there would be need to have more peer learning or benchmarking processes amongst the three regions, and looking especially at labor mobility. I'm based in Vanuatu, and Vanuatu happens to be the biggest sender of labor to the Australian and I believe the New Zealand market under some bilateral labor arrangements. But the salient issue that usually misses in this arrangement is looking at labor from an angle of economic development and fair trade. And with that, looking at it as not only aid for trade, but also trade to aid. You know, you need labor, intensive labor, for you to be able to increase your exports. And with that, it would be ideal to explore further labor relations or labor markets, looking predominantly at semi-skilled and skilled in the Pacific, and opportunities that could be available in the Indian market, and also additionally, of course, in Australia, if we are looking at the trilateral approach. Connectivity, I've had my colleague, Comrade Anil, Singh talk about maritime connectivity. That is a key issue in this region, looking at the issues of the airlines and shipping, but I would like to emphasize greatly on the airline industry. If we could have a way of expanding the hub to include more flights getting into the Asian market and India predominantly, that would be a plus in terms of increasing our export market and also our labor market. As I said, a great number of Pacific Island countries are great labor senders, and many times the sending or the concept or the framework within which the labor market is operating primarily right now is within the remit of seasonal work. But we are looking at ways of extending it beyond just seasonal work. And looking at it as an upskilling and mid-skilling labor mobility programs. Quality infrastructure, this is one area that a lot of collaboration would be needed. We normally have this saying that market access is what is written on paper, but the practicals remain to be market entry. And that's where we have the issues of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and to a large extent, technical barriers to trade. And so looking at more collaboration and support, capacity building, and importantly, the use and building of hard infrastructure that would enhance quality infrastructure in the region would be of added value in strengthening the trade relations. Trade finance, especially for micro, small, and medium enterprises. I hope I'm audible. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you. Trade finance is also one area we would need to strongly consider a collaboration. I know India is a step higher when looking at MSME development, and I think that's a key area that needs to be explored. In 2021, we had our first trade finance symposium that was held in Suva, Fiji. It was a virtual symposium, and what the salient issues for discussion was that MSMEs still find it difficult to access finance for them to trade, and that also includes, on the flip side, government guarantees. In that respect, also, I would look at trade facilitation. How can we best use digital infrastructure to make ease of doing business at the borders much more efficient? Looking at Africa, there's the model of one-stop border posts. How can that be replicated in the case of the Pacific, working closely with India and Australia? On the regulatory front, we are still, other than Fiji, which is a step ahead, and I believe Papua New Guinea, I think we still don't have institutions that predominantly address the issue of competition policy, competition regulations. And this is one area I think we would need to explore, how to look at a competition regulatory maybe strategy or institution that could assist all the Pacific Island countries taking a leaf from Fiji and Papua New Guinea. I would also like to remind us that within the Pacific, looking still at the model argument, we have regional institutions that would be ideal in working closely with. We have a regional institution that's in charge of climate. I've heard us talking about climate and SDGs. We have SPREP. We have the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. That's the regional premier institution for the entire Pacific Islands. We have the sub-region where I am in Vanuatu. We have the Melanesian Spearhead Group Secretariat. And in all this, we should not lose sight in terms of modeling this cooperation. And I had Dr. Tess mention it from afar, the importance of being aligned to the Vision 2050 leaders a strategy for the region in terms of the priority areas and what exactly the leaders in the Pacific are after when it comes to this kind of collaboration with other regions like India and of course Africa, noting that Australia is part of the forum in this kind of architecture. So Chair, I think that's just a brief overview in terms of how we could shape this kind of cooperation. A lot has been done on the ground, so we are not entering into a new space, and it would be good for us to be alive to what is existing and taking note that also just closing comments. For the region, Aid for Trade has taken a bottom-up approach and is already a blueprint Pacific Aid for Trade strategy that has key priority areas that can be a guiding light or a beam in terms of cooperation and support. And that strategy is found in the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat website. It's a public document, including the Vision 2050 strategy. I would implore upon us to have time. I'll share the link and read it through, and you'll be able to see what is a priority and how that can be aligned in this envisaged trilateral cooperation. Thank you, Chair, and back to you.
Thank you very much for those very important views, and thank you for pointing out about the ACP model and the Samoa Agreement, first of all, and also your priorities as far as exports to Asia and India are concerned. The trade finance collaboration, which is important, especially for SMEs, and also the trade facilitation aspect and ease of doing business. You also pointed out about the priorities for the region, which is extremely important going forward. Many thanks for your views. So now we have a few questions. I will take one question from each of the people who have asked multiple questions. So let me first ask Abhishek Chaudhary your question: how do India and Australia balance the growing economic dependence on China with their strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific, particularly with respect to South Pacific countries? Dr. Tess, would you like to take that question, please?
Thank you, Ambassador. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that everyone, takes a bit of a breath and realizes that we have to be realistic about this. People in the Pacific, the economic ministers, their advisors, they know what's going on. They can see how countries such as Australia and India and other countries are are building their economies and sustaining on their economies on a very strong, multifaceted relationship with China, particularly in the case of Australia. We've just seen great celebrations that now Australia can resume sending beef to China after that was put under a ban. So countries, people that are looking for economic opportunity in the Pacific, where there are often in a number of countries in Melanesia where Dr. Jill's based, we've got large, young populations with insufficient job opportunities to meet the need. So they're looking for opportunities to build their economy, and they're not really in the market for being told, well, this was okay for us, but we don't really want you doing that yourselves. We want you to do something else. I think that Pacific Island countries are open to a range of conversations. They've made it clear in their foreign policy statements that they consider themselves friends to all and enemies to none. Some of the countries in the region are, like India, non-aligned countries. That includes Vanuatu or Papua New Guinea. So they're looking to be able to maximize all of the options that are available to them to meet their needs. And they know what their needs are. They've made them very clear. They've stated them and restated them on numerous occasions. And they're looking to work with partners that can help them meet those needs. Now, we heard previously about being able to offer a better model than is on offer from China. Certainly, there's scope for that, and we're seeing different ways of doing that. The reality is that up until very recently, the major concern was infrastructure. The ADB identified a long time ago that there was a huge infrastructure deficit in the region. And for quite a while there, only China was interested in providing the appropriate financing and technical input to build the sort of infrastructure that was needed. We're seeing that change, but I think everyone just needs to realize that China's not going anywhere, and China will continue to be a presence in the region, certainly as an economic partner, which is what most countries are looking for. Whether it continues to make inroads into becoming a security partner is a different issue, but I think there needs to be a lot more subtlety and nuance around how partners engage with Pacific leaders in helping, in seeking to influence the sorts of decisions that are being made.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Aditya Bhan is asking, over the next 3 to 5 years, what tangible steps can be cooperatively taken to enhance maritime domain awareness in the Indo-Pacific? Commodore Anil Jaisingh, would you like to take that question, please?
I'll try and answer that question. Well, I think maritime domain awareness has now been understood to be one of the most important elements of maritime security. It's not only maritime security, it's the maritime domain. That's why it's called the maritime domain awareness. And often we use this rather broad-based term to describe in a very narrow security context, or perhaps what should be called maritime situational awareness. Because maritime domain awareness includes knowledge of what is below the surface of the sea, what is on the surface of the sea in terms of resources, in terms of just about everything to do with the maritime domain. But I think India has taken the lead in the Indian Ocean through, of course, like I mentioned, the Sagar policy, to create an inclusive capacity building infrastructure with its maritime neighborhood to enhance maritime domain awareness. And in the larger Indo-Pacific, countries, the other members of the Quad, through a series of multilateral exercises, foundational agreements, interoperability of equipment, common platforms, and a host of other activities, information sharing mechanisms, like was brought out. So we have about 6 or 7 major information sharing mechanisms operating in West Asia, the Central Indian Ocean, and east of the Malacca Straits, starting with those that came up at the time of Somali piracy in 2008, including SHADE and RECAP, which were basically addressed at piracy. Then there's EU NAV4, there are many, many mechanisms. Then, of course, there are the information sharing, information fusion centers, Madagascar, India, Singapore. So if all of these can put all their information that they collect together, collate it well, carry out this information fusion, and then disseminate it to the forces at sea, I think this will contribute greatly towards improving maritime domain awareness. More importantly, I think besides this is the space element. We haven't discussed space, but space is going to be absolutely indispensable to the maritime domain in the near future, because the kind of swath of ocean that a satellite can cover, and now we right from low Earth orbit satellites right up to 32,000 kilometers, we can sort of position satellites depending on what we want covered. We can have persistent monitoring of certain areas, particularly where IUU fishing is suspected. Ships which switch off their automatic identification systems can be tracked by satellite, particularly when, this is specific reference to the Chinese fishing fleet, who sort of operate just outside the EEZ of countries. And then out of that large fishing fleet, which is together, 4 or 5 ships go dark, which means that they switch off the AIS transponders, go into the EEZ of another country, do whatever fishing they have to do, come out, switch on their AIS transponders, and 3 days later, another set of 5 ships does it. So it creates a bit of confusion. But if there's persistent monitoring from space, then you can actually identify which ship has switched off and which ship has switched on its AIS transponders. So there are many, many areas where maritime domain awareness is going to become increasingly important and increasingly robust in the next 3 to 5 years. So if that answers your question.
Thank you. Next question from Pawan Chudasama. With fish stock depletion due to climate change, IUU fishing, and other factors, how can PICs adapt their fisheries management policies to ensure long-term sustainability? Joel Abraham, can you answer that question, please?
Thank you. It's a very interesting question, and basically fisheries management and ensuring that you continuously have the supply. That is where the concept of sustainable fishing and sustainable fisheries come in, and that is why protecting our ecosystems become quite important. Making sure that we are fighting against the impacts of climate change to address concerns of ocean acidification that ultimately destroys coral, which then disrupts the whole chain. So we are also looking at sustainability initiatives. I know Fiji's got one of the most beautiful coral sculptures, underwater coral sculptures. So Fiji's invested in that through the private sector. There's a lot of coral restoration programs happening, mangrove restoration programs. So the idea of looking at fisheries is not just limited to fisheries alone. We would have to go back in the supply chain and ensure that we are able to build in community-based resilience, making sure that they're able to cater for their own needs in terms of subsistence fishing, but also that there's enough pool of fish available for commercial fishing as well.
Thank you. Sarabjit Parmar is asking a question. Speaking of disasters and infrastructure, only four, if I recall correctly, Fiji, Tonga, Nauru, and Samoa, are part of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. PIF is also not on board as an organization. So, Dr. Jill Juma, can you offer your views on how the low numbers of island nations on board and how these nations in the PIF could be encouraged to come on board?
Thank you, Ambassador. If you don't mind, I think I missed a part of the question. Would you mind repeating it?
Yeah, the question is that only four countries, which is Fiji, Tonga, Nauru, and Samoa, are part of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And PIF is also not on board as an organization. So what is the reason for these low numbers of island nations on board, and how these nations and the PIF could be encouraged to come on board?
All right. Thank you for that question. I'm not exactly a climate expert, but I would attempt to respond to it based on what is being undertaken presently under PIF, I believe Pacific, the Forum Secretariat. I believe that's what the question is addressing. So I think last year during the leaders meeting in Tonga, we just launched the Pacific Resilience Facility, and that is going to be coordinated by the Forum Secretariat. So that is one avenue that the Forum Secretariat is going to be playing a key role in pulling together all countries to be part of this facility because of the common or collective actions needed insofar as climate change is concerned. I wouldn't have a straight answer as to why only these 5 or 4 are part of that committee and the rest are out. But I would, at the top of my head, think that this is purely a voluntary process. Is not being triggered by the Forum Secretariat. It is countries coming into it in their own sovereign arrangement. But within the remit of PIFs, what I could with confidence say is the launch of the Pacific Resilience Facility in Tonga last year would be that avenue where the collective Pacific Island countries would be part of this climate change discourse. And also within the forum, we have a climate resilience team that is charged with this kind of awareness and sensitization. So that is my very, very basic answer. Insights into it, I would be glad to connect him to the focal persons in the forum and in the SPREP who would be able to give him further insights to that. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador.
Now, we take just the last question because we've run out of time. And that Ambassador Gurjit Singh can address this question. How can India and Australia leverage their growing strategic partnership to counter China's influence in the Pacific while creating a development model that respects the sovereignty and priorities of Pacific Island states, fosters trust, and supports a multipolar Indo-Pacific vision amidst the region's resistance to great power rivalries. And the question is from Shabnam Batul. You have the floor.
Thank you. So I think what the question is asking is the correct approach. If you want to take on China, you have to come up with an alternative development approach. And I think this is what I originally said, that what India does in Africa cannot be entirely replicated, but the approach is acceptable. The approach is that we are not a colonial power, we don't have colonial baggage, we are a South-South partner, we understand the pain of developing countries, and we can work with them in our limited capacity. Working with Australia enhances that capacity. And it gives you much more depth because Australia is present there in a huge way for long. So I think there is a mutual compatibility there which can benefit the islands of the South Pacific greatly. And if we can work out that development model, I think that would be a good challenge to China in terms of how we do it and how they do it, and that is where the difference lies. These development models today, particularly to implement the SDGs, are actually strategic actions, and we should look at them that way rather than only look at deploying our navy or maritime security to challenge China elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've completely run out of time. It just shows the amount of interest in this event that we have many more questions which have been left unanswered. But I'd like to thank very much the panelists for being so focused with their views and very, very informative with their views. Thank you very much, Joel Abraham, Colonel Napio, Ambassador Gurjit Singh, Dr. Tess, Jill Juma, Commander Anil Jai Singh. Thank you very much for your views and for being present here. And thank you very much to the audience for your questions. I'd like to now wind up this event. Once again, thank you so much to CUTS International for organizing this event.
Thank you, Chair and Moderator. At the outset, thank you again for moderating this session. And this, as you mentioned, this calls for another session as we have run out of time. We have overshot by 15 minutes. We have culled out a few of the points that we are going to further take it into our report, which will also call it into another session. We are going to build on whatever we have discussed so far, and from here we are going to take further. And likewise, we need more connectivity in the larger area of diversity. That is the key takeaway from here. So thank you once again, our participants, our distinguished panelists. Look forward to remaining in touch and working furthermore in this large area. Thank you. Thank you, participants. Have a good day.